Ecchi is one of the most divisive tropes or genres of anime. Ecchi is a word that can be loosely translated to sexy or naughty. It is the preferred term in Western anime culture, primarily to describe anime with light, playful sexual content. This is content that hints at sexual themes and places characters in lewd or sexually compromising situations, usually for humor or fan service. It contrasts explicit depictions or scenes that are often found in what the culture terms hentai. Now, ecchi shows do exist in their own right. Kill la Kill and Food Wars uses ecchi as a primary vehicle for its storytelling, but ecchi can be found in just about every shonen, from the big busted character to the perpetually half-naked guy. It's just a part of appealing to the audience and keeping their attention, and often just an inside joke. Now, does ecchi appeal to our higher selves? Certainly not, but it's generally harmless in most cases and can be quite funny at times. It can even be welcome. Yet there are some times when it is downright offensive and can turn off the viewer. Even for the most acclaimed shows like Kill la Kill or Food Wars that uses ecchi throughout its runtime and falls into the ecchi genre, some people don't like that at all. Seeing otherwise affable characters constantly being placed into situations where their clothes fall off is really off-putting for some, and they don't want to watch a program like that. This is well within their rights because your sensibilities are your sensibilities. However, today we'll be exploring why and when ecchi isn't offensive, when it is fun or comical, and something you come to anticipate with joy. And as a part of this case study, we'll be looking primarily at Fairy Tail to explain why some ecchi content doesn't have to be offensive. Now, if you're of the opinion that all ecchi content is wrong, offensive, and problematic, that is just fine. Not that I go out looking for it, I tend to just find ecchi on occasion, but I find some offensive too. But not all, which is why we're looking at that today. So if you feel that it's all offensive to you, fine, you can have that. And your
slaw! You have your slaw, sir! I want my slaw! You have your slaw, sir! I want my slaw!
So let's go ahead and unpack the ways in which Fairy Tail displays the characteristics of ecchi and adds that dynamic of fan service into its program. One of the things that you'll notice right away from characters in Fairy Tail is that they have a particular design. A lot of female characters have very large busts. They'll have cleavage showing. You'll also notice that all the female characters are relatively curvaceous. Of the male characters, you'll notice that a lot of them are not just muscular, but go without shirts. So there is a revealing aspect even of their character designs as far as clothing is concerned. You'll also notice that as you go from episode to episode, there are certain shots and angles that are used to add fan service to the episode. One of the most notorious examples of this is with Lucy Heartfilia. She's often seen as early as the first episodes of the show in shots that show very compromising angles of her. You'll see Lucy fall on the ground and there will be a shot of her undercarriage or her panties, and you'll see a shot of her bosom, or there will be shots of her losing her clothes without wanting to, or there will be scenes of her getting exposed while she's taking a bath, for instance. This is what you'll see often with that character, but also sprinkled throughout other aspects of the show. The characters of the show, despite how often they are linked with other characters romantically, don't spend very much narrative time focusing on the development of those relationships. So when it comes to interactions that the characters have with their counterparts, it tends to be comical scenes between story beats that show them in a risque moment. You'll see this a lot with different characters, and it's always played for a laugh. It's always playful, but it happens quite often in some ways to advance their romantic storyline, but also just to have fun with the audience. In fact, you'll also see this with and in between characters that the story wants to ship together but aren't officially a couple, particularly when it comes to the teams that are in Fairy Tail. Grateful Buster is a good example of this, as well as the entire ecchi dynamic. Gray is a character that has an ecchi trope that he is always losing his clothing. There is a narrative explanation for this in that in order for him to train his abilities as an ice mage, he went without clothing because he has a natural resistance to it, and it helps build up his stamina, and his natural resistance to the cold. And now he generally likes going without clothes because it feels better to him, even if he doesn't mean to take off his clothes when he does, or even if it embarrasses him on occasion. This is a very common piece of fan service that you'll see often in the show with that character, but he is also romantically linked to other characters like Juvia. Juvia is the character that the show has linked to him as a partner romantically, and so their interactions often push ecchi scenes. Juvia will try to do something seductive to get Gray's attention, and Gray will become embarrassed, or he'll try to rebuff her even though he secretly likes her. Some of the seductive acts that she'll do is actually a wide variety of perverted acts, like showing him her butt, or trying to get naked in front of him by accident, or other ways in which she might want to touch him or reveal herself to him. But not only that, you'll also see Gray linked in other ecchi scenes with other female characters that he spends more time with because Juvia isn't actually on his wizard team. Gray is also often linked with Lucy, a character that Juvia calls her love rival and will have a sixth sense whenever something sexy happens between Gray and Lucy. The same type of embarrassing, clumsy moments in which Gray is touching Lucy or Lucy falls into him or exposes herself to him, or he to her, happens with Lucy just as much as it might happen with Juvia. This is the way that ecchi is portrayed in this program, and generally speaking, the show spans at least 25% of its runtime on jokes or scenes that could be described as ecchi. This occurs with not only the characters that I've mentioned, but between a lot of different characters on the show. Most of the female characters are very sexy, some of the men characters are also drawn very revealing or sexy. You'll also find that there are a number of different in-universe romantic couples or pairings that have ecchi scenes together when they do appear on screen, like Erza and Jalal, Lucy and Natsu, as well as other random characters on the show like the older wizards and any of the younger female wizards on the show. It's honestly something that is so well baked into the show and is so playful that you don't often realize that it's presenting something that could be considered risque by some people, and something you generally don't notice if you've watched enough of it. There are a number of reasons why fairy tale and shows like it don't feel offensive when they display these images and follow these ecchi tropes. And one of the reasons for this is because there is an in-universe sense of gender equality. One of the things that makes sexual interaction so problematic between men and women socially is because there is a power imbalance. Women are quote-unquote the weaker sex, and sexual advances from men, especially if they're unwanted, can not just be inappropriate, but dangerous in a number of different settings, especially between people who don't know each other well. If these advances turn into acts, or if those acts turn aggressive or violent, the supposition is that women would not be able to protect themselves. This is not the case for shows that have a balance between the powers of both sexes. Women in the fairy tale universe are just as powerful as men can be. Women are still the softer sex in the sense that they are more curvy and less muscular looking and smaller generally speaking, but because most of the characters in the show have magic regardless of whether they are in a wizard guild or not, there is a level of equality that you don't see in the real world. So when there is an advance from a male character to a female character, there isn't an underlying sense of danger, because that female character can protect herself. And not only can that character protect herself, many, if not an equal portion, of the main characters that are the big villains or big baddies in the show have turned out to be female themselves. They make a point at showing not only can the male characters be the villain, but the women can be the villain as well. And not only can women rely on men to save the day, but women themselves can save the day, even for male characters. There are characters like Erza, Mira Jane, and Mavis who are established as some of the most powerful wizards in the Fairy Tale Guild. We also have characters like the Demons of Zareth, the White Mage, various dragons, Erza's birth mother, and the Black Mage, which is one of the final bosses of the 100-Year Quest manga. All of these characters are female characters that present themselves as the most powerful and undefeatable by other characters. So when it comes to these ecchi scenes and how they portray them, there is never a sense of anxiousness when you watch these scenes because these characters, despite that risque moment, despite the innuendos between the characters, there is an internal understanding that these characters can take care of themselves, that these characters are strong and that these characters are equal to the men that they are counterparts of. And even in examples when men do take advantage of female characters, like with Gajil and Levi, there are plenty of other examples of female characters becoming stronger than those male characters later on, or examples of female characters that male character couldn't even defeat. And in addition to this in-world gender equality, there is another layer of egalitarianism that we see in the show, and that's that the male characters get teased sexually as much as the female characters. Although socially we don't view male nudity as harshly as we do female nudity, there are many male characters that have very revealing character designs, often having their shirt off or having their chest out or having their clothes fall off at different occasions. There are also examples of male characters with huge, ginormous muscles in a way that could be read as a counterpart to the female characters with huge busts or being overly curvaceous. So you'll notice in the show that in the same way that these women characters are the butt of these ecchi jokes, so too are the male characters. They'll make fun of each other for accidentally falling on each other or being naked in front of each other. They'll make fun of two female characters falling into a male character or a male character falling into a female character. And so there is a sense of equality in which men aren't above women in terms of their power, but also in their ability to be read as objects of sexual desire and comedy. And I say this even if the show as a shonen does skew towards female ecchi scenes. So the experience you have watching Fairy Tail makes you feel rather safe, as if you would like to see yourself in that world, and that it's all for fun and that it's all for play. And this is actually the most important reason why in Fairy Tail and also in other shows, ecchi tropes can be viewed as inoffensive. It is because when they are read as for play, it's less easy for us to read them as inappropriate or wrong. When these sexual scenes happen, regardless of who is the receiver of the joke or who the joke is at the expense of, those characters don't dwell on those experiences, and many of them laugh them off as embarrassing rather than traumatic. There's also a layer of this was something I was thinking but didn't want to do that a lot of characters have as well, because those ecchi scenes are usually done between characters that they have some kind of romantic tie to or a very familial tie with. So you'll notice characters laugh, you'll notice that the characters look embarrassed, and then in the very next scene, they're over it, and they don't have to bring it up. It's almost as if that scene didn't happen in the canon of the show, because they're allowing those scenes to be really something primarily for the audience and not something that the characters really acknowledge or remember in their own universe. This is important because in other ecchi shows, where all of those scenes could be read as ecchi, the characters getting exposed, the characters accidentally falling into one another, the characters said something sexual, are often part of the canon. And if those characters read that interaction as scary or dangerous or inappropriate, even if it was for fan service, for the audience, it's harder not to feel offended for those characters when they are offended themselves. Even if individual acts in some shows are not remembered, there will be a reputation for a character that labels them as a creep. Now, in some shows, that label is also playful, and it's given to a well-meaning character who accidentally falls into situations with romantically linked characters or other characters that could be read as inappropriate or sexual, and that creep label can just be a ways to tease that character. But there are other shows and examples of characters that are notorious for that kind of behavior and disliked in universe because of that sexual aspect to their person. So naturally, this would lead us into a conversation about when ecchi actually is inappropriate and when does it feel offensive as an audience member. Often this occurs when it isn't played for laughs, when the in-universe context of the situation is something in which someone is taking advantage of another character. One really clear example for me would be in Seven Deadly Sins. I really enjoyed many of the aspects of the show. I liked the character designs. I liked the powers and the abilities of the characters. I also liked the general theming around the story of Camelot. However, the ecchi characteristics of this show, and this show is a shonen, even though it uses those tropes less often than in shows like Fairy Tail, I found it more offensive in Seven Deadly Sins because of context. One of the things that I found most offensive about Seven Deadly Sins is their use of ecchi tropes in the main character Meliodas and his partner or female counterpart Elizabeth. For most of the first part of the show, there would be a lot of different scenes in which Meliodas is doing something very sexual to Elizabeth from as early as their first meeting. He would touch her inappropriately. He would say things to her that were inappropriate. He would get too close to her, and she would just kind of brush off that behavior. It seemed very inappropriate or creepy because even in the universe of that show, even though women can be powerful, women characters are not as strong as the male characters. There wasn't parity between the powers of the sexes. Most of the knights were male. Even though there were female ones, they would have to be exceptional in order for them to be as strong as the male characters. And not only was there a lack of gender equality in the universe of the show, Meliodas didn't know Elizabeth for much of the initial run. And as an audience member, you don't really know what their relationship is. You just see a stranger kind of choosing at random a pretty girl that he likes and then is doing a lot of inappropriate behaviors to her. Now, in the canon of the show, you don't realize until much later that Elizabeth and Meliodas are actual partners. And there's a reason why Elizabeth doesn't remember Meliodas. The reason is because she was cursed to forget him every time she is reincarnated. And she gets reincarnated over and over. However, even with that explanation, that gives a reason behind all of those very abusive behaviors that Meliodas would have towards her, even though they liked each other as friends, it's still very inappropriate, especially given the context of the show and comparing it to our real lives. Even though it was playful, there was a power imbalance there, especially given that explanation. Meliodas was doing these behaviors to an amnesiac, which also feels very inappropriate and kind of widens that power imbalance. Another example is Mineta from My Hero Academia. He's a creeper. People don't like him being around because he's constantly looking at or thinking or talking about or trying to touch a female counterpart. I think in the context of the show, he's meant to be disliked, but sometimes the depictions of what he's actually doing makes him feel not merely a reflection of some male people that you may know in the real world who behave like this and are disliked for it, but also because you actually see him having these characteristics and doing these acts which are very inappropriate. Also, within the context of the show, men are still generally more powerful than women, even though all the characters have a quirk for the most part. And additionally, and more importantly, the characters don't like it. And in universe, Mineta is known as a creeper. It's not something that the characters just forget. But this isn't just true of male characters in anime shows. This is also true of female characters as well. In Fire Force, there is a female character who has cat-like abilities. Her name is Tamaki. But her ecchi trope is that she constantly loses her clothes. Even though the show tries to play this for laughs, it sometimes feels for me a bit inappropriate because Tamaki doesn't like this ability of hers. She seems very distressed by the fact that she's constantly losing her clothes and constantly falling into sexual situations. It's so hard to read a scene with her behaving this way as playful, even for the audience, because she's struggling so much as a character within the actual universe of the show. So when I watch this show and that character, it makes me wish that they would just skip that part of her character entirely because she seems so distressed. Now, there are plenty of other characters in other shows that have various aspects of this inappropriate or offensive type of ecchi trope. You can point to just about any anime or any shonen for that matter that has some kind of ecchi aspect that can be read as inappropriate. But when it comes to when these scenes are fun and when they are playful, when they can be enjoyed, when they are not offensive, you generally have to have the context that we've mentioned here. They have to be funny. They have to be playful. There should be some level of gender equality or egalitarianism within the universe of the actual show. Some shows beyond Fairy Tail that are pretty good at this would be Food Wars. Food Wars is a show that is loved by many people, but the characters often find themselves without clothes. It is an ecchi characteristic, but the characters don't really remember this in universe for the most part, and it's generally very playful. Kill la Kill is an example of another very ecchi show, but in the universe of the show, female characters are just as powerful as male characters, so there is a level of gender equality there. And the ecchi characteristics of the show are more thematically empowering than a reflection of merely a wink and a nod that the showrunners are trying to give the audience. When the main character transforms and becomes very scantily clad, this is also the most powerful person on screen. And when characters lose their clothes, it often means that they've been purified and that they've lost all of their powers. So there's a level of symbolism there, thematically, that insulates this program from being read as offensive. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid could be another good example. This show is very ecchi, but most of the characters are female, like 99% of them, so there is no inherent sense of power imbalance between the characters on the show, so everything feels a bit safe and a bit playful. So this is why you may not feel very offended when it comes to watching Fairy Tail and shows like it. There are shows out there that you will really enjoy for all of their characteristics, including their sexual variety, which is usually in the form of comedy. Ecchi programs aren't for everybody, and I wouldn't encourage anybody to go out and look for them necessarily, if for no other reason than it's just an aspect of anime and you're going to find it wherever you find most anime. But when it comes to shows that you truly enjoy and that you want to put on your top 10, these are the shows that you really like and you always want to come back to, even with their sexual innuendos and their risque moments. When they're done respectfully, with respect to the characters and the universe and the viewer, these are the types of shows that you really don't find offense in.